Hey seniors, we're going to talk about writing today to stay mentally active. You can see on this slide that there's a picture of a book called Endocles' First Contact. That's a book that I wrote with the assistance of my daughter, and you can find that actually on Kindle, and it's going to be free for the next week or so. So if you're so inclined and want to read about people in the inner earth, go out and get a copy of that book while you can, while it's free. I think it's only going to run free for about 5 or 6 days. So let's talk about starting writing. One of the first things you need to talk about or think about is whether you're going to write nonfiction or fiction. And of course, nonfiction is more of the true stuff, and fiction is, in my mind anyway, more creative and more fun to write. That's the way I feel about it anyway. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about writing software a little bit, writing avenues, different places that you can write, and types of articles that you can write. We'll talk about publishing and printing houses, and then we're going to talk about ebook publishing and all as well. So that's kind of the table of contents for this video. So let's go ahead and get into it. Nonfiction writing consists of books, essays, themes, short topics, things like that, documentation. All those things will fit in the idea of nonfiction writing, which should represent truth and accuracy. So here's this is the type of writing where you need to be involved in facts. You see the book on the right-hand side of the slide called U.S. Tax and SAP. That is SAP, it's not SAPS, so it's not U.S. Tax and SAPS. It's actually, SAP is a large enterprise-wide program that the majority of the Fortune 500 companies are using for their software and all their financial and marketing and warehousing areas within the company. Now, let me say this. I had written 2.5 manuscripts, fictional manuscripts, before I wrote this book, and I floated it in front of the publishers that publish books for SAP, and it was snapped up right away. Now, my other books were creative. They were imaginative. I thought they were fantastic, and I couldn't even get a publisher to look at them. So I write this nonfiction book, which is probably the most boring book that I've ever written, and it's snapped up right away. And so one of my conclusions is that nonfiction writing, there's a lot more books published. You can get published easier if you're a subject matter in a particular area. It will take some research because you do have to have facts. So as I said before, it's supposed to represent accuracy and truth. So there's more research involved here in nonfiction, I think, than in most fiction books. But also, I think, for the most part, your earnings per book may be lower. Now, I guess when you look at all the fiction books that are written and the fact that, there's a huge market out there for self-published books, fiction-type books on Kindle Direct Publishing and places like that we'll talk about later. Lots of times you don't earn anything on those books, so possibly your nonfiction writing, if you get them published, even though the proceeds aren't real high, you do at least make some money off them. On the other hand, it can be very boring to write these books. That's my opinion anyway, and maybe maybe some of you out there really love writing nonfiction and documentaries and things like that, so excuse me if that's the case. That being said, let's go into fiction writing. I enjoy fiction writing much more because it is much more creative, I think, and I enjoy reading a lot, and I enjoy reading fiction and fantasy even, so it's much more creative, I think, and when you talk about developing your mind and keeping it active, I think this is a very good way to do it. But on the other hand, you've got to realize that it's extremely difficult to get published in the fiction area. The authors are just hard to find. It's hard to find an agent that'll even work with you or even return your emails or letters or whatever. So But you can create worlds out there. I mean, it's exciting, I think. Generally less research unless you're doing historical fiction. You do want to have your historical fiction even accurate, so there is some research in certain types of fiction. Certainly in fantasy, there's not a great deal, but you need to understand what genre you're writing with, and stay in that genre as closely as possible. If you can land an agent or a publisher and you publish your book, your earnings may be much higher than what they are writing a fiction book, or a nonfiction book. So be aware of that. I want to talk for a minute about what you need to actually start writing. And really, writing has got a very low cost of entry. I mean, if you've got a pad of paper and a pen, you can actually start writing. And that's all it takes, and that's the way people used to do it. But today, we have computers, and it's much easier to write using a computer and some type of word processing program. The most widely used word processing program is Microsoft Word. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, but it's very good. It is what I use. I use Microsoft Word now. One that's highly recommended among many people is Scrivener, and it only costs about $50, but I actually own a copy of Scrivener. I started using it, and it just wasn't working for me, and I couldn't quite figure out how to use it, I guess. And I'm no dummy. I've passed the CPA exam, and I can understand SAP, which is one of the biggest software programs in the world. But Scrivener was giving me problems, and it wasn't working the way I thought it would, so I don't use it. I use Microsoft Word, like I mentioned. But if you do a search on book writing software, there's many free softwares out there. There are lots of sites that will rate your top 10 writing softwares and stuff like that. So I would recommend you have at least Microsoft Word, and if you want to get something else like Scrivener or some other program, and that works for you, that would be great. A lot of avenues that you can choose when you're writing, and writing keeps you mentally alert, it keeps your brain working, and so that's one of the reasons I think that I'm doing this video, because it is a way to keep your mind active. So some of the writing avenues, you can write books, and there's a lot of time spent writing books. I have to say that writing a novel takes a long time. It takes me a long time. I mean, some people it just flows right out of, and they can write a book every 3 months, but it takes me a lot longer. I have to work at it a lot harder. But magazine articles would be one way. Poetry, short stories, documentation, personal histories, newspaper articles, cookbooks, freelance writing for magazines and other types of sources would be good as well. There's a YouTube channel out there called Location Rebel, and he talks a lot. He makes many videos about freelance writing and how freelance writing may be the fastest way to make money on the internet or in social media anyway. So that's one thing to look at as well. In freelance writing, you can write about many different things. Let's talk about publishers for a minute. When I did the boring book, the U.S. Tax and SAP, I actually had a publisher that I worked with, and they helped me with the editing. They actually took responsibility for publishing the book and marketing the book, and then they paid me a royalty for that. And that's one way to do it. And if you're writing nonfiction, it may be possible to find a publisher. If you're writing fiction, it's much more difficult, because these publishers do carry the cost of these books, and if you're not successful, they lose money. So especially in the fiction area, they're not very eager to take on new authors, let's put it that way. But that is one way to go when you're actually looking at writing a book. The other way is what I'm calling printing houses, and that's my term. That's not necessarily an industry term, but the book on the front cover of the slides, Endocles' First Contact, was actually printed through a printing house. And that's what these guys are mostly, is they are printing houses, and they do a good job. They came out with a fine book and stuff, but they're companies that provide printing services and possibly cover design, and sometimes they provide kind of a marketing thing that just gives you ideas. They don't go out and do any marketing for you, but the main people they market to is self-publishing for their books. They want people that want to get their books published, and so they go to these guys and self-publish. You retain the rights to the book, so you've got the copyright and everything, but you also have to do all the marketing. And so very hard to get these books to sell very much, but it's nice to have a published book in your hand. I mean, a printed book in your hand that looks very nice. If you do decide to go this route, I would not. I would go as basic as possible. When I had my book published, and it was published through Outskirts Press, and they did a nice job, but I spent more than what I needed to. There were some things that I spent money on that I didn't take advantage of or weren't that helpful. So I would just get your book published at the basic price that you possibly can, and then go from there. So some examples of companies in this area are Author House, Kindle Direct Publishing, Outskirts Press. I mentioned before I personally used Outskirts Press for my book, and they did a nice job. So if you're going to go this area, those are some of the companies available, but you can always go out and Google self-publishing printing places, and it'll give you a lot more. The last subject for this video is ebook publishing. So let's talk about that. Kindle Direct Publishing seems to be the giant in this area, and they make it very easy to establish an account and to load your book up, to edit it, and to get it out there as an ebook on Amazon. Problem is, there are thousands of books out there, and getting yours noticed is very difficult, but I mean, it's free to do. You can get it out there, and if you can do some marketing, effective marketing, you may be able to sell some things. And actually, Kindle Direct Publishing rewards its authors that get read quite a bit. Pretty good from what I see. I get a monthly update of the Kindle funds that are distributed to different authors, and unfortunately I'm not one of them, but it's quite a bit of money. But it seems like the authors that make money on Kindle are those that have 20, maybe 40 books out there, and they've offered several of them free for quite a while, and they get a following that way. And when they get a following, they just keep writing books, and people keep following them, and that seems to work pretty good for them. Unfortunately, I am not that prolific of a writer, and so I don't have that many books out there. Currently, I've only got one, and hopefully I'll get my sequel to that out pretty quick. Some interesting facts, though. I was reading that 30 to 40% of the books that are read now have been written by self-published authors, and so that number is growing, and 40% of those books are ebooks, and I think the ebook number is going to continue to grow as we have more book readers, and it's just easier to read them on an ebook. I read all my books these days on ebooks on an e-reader like Kindle Fire, so I think that's going to grow bigger and bigger. So ebook publishing is certainly a good alternative that you might want to look at. So in conclusion, start writing. I hope this serves as a good introduction to writing, whether you're writing articles or whatever. Turn on your computer and start writing. It's a good way to stay mentally active. Hope you've enjoyed this. Stay healthy, stay active, especially with the coronavirus out there. Subscribe to this, like it, and I appreciate your attendance. Thank you.